Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on the Theatre Improvement Scheme with the Wolfson Foundation. Welcome. My name is John Morgan. I'm the Director of the Theatres Trust. I'm just going to say a few words about the purpose of the webinar today before handing over to our Interim Theatres Advisor, Rebecca Morland. Today, what we want to do is just to talk a little bit about the purpose of the scheme, of the funding scheme, and the kinds of things that we want to support through the scheme, and what the key criteria are for awarding grants, which hopefully will help you decide if this is a scheme you want to apply to, but also it will give you some guidance on making an application, what we want to see, what you need to do to make a strong case for your grant. And a little bit about the application process as well. Want to take this opportunity to thank the Wolfson Foundation for supporting this scheme. They share our commitment to the importance of sustainability and the role that the theatre sector has playing in that. And this is the fourth year of the scheme. And it's really grown over those few years. Back in 2021, we had 31 applications. And last year we had 79 applications to the scheme, which is the background to why we are doing this webinar. It's great from our perspective to see that the scheme is popular and that there are lots of people applying. But it has been more challenging for us to kind of give people the kind of support they need and the advice they need to make a good application. And sadly, we no longer have the capacity to give one-to-one advice about the scheme just because of the numbers of people now applying. So as part of helping people make good applications to the scheme and increase their chances of success, we have created some new written guidance, which hopefully you've had a look at prior to today's webinar, but absolutely do look at it along with the terms and conditions that are on the website when you do apply. So this is about trying to make the process as supportive and as it can be with some written guidance and also this webinar, which will hopefully answer any kind of questions that may have come up from looking at the guidance. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start off. We are recording it. Again, that's so that you can look back at this later. We'll send you the link next week. And we'll be putting it on our website so that anybody who wasn't able to attend can rewatch and benefit from the advice and guidance and the questions that you may wish to ask as well. Please, could you keep your cameras and your mics off throughout? It means it's easier for people then to just focus on the speaker rather than having lots and lots of screens of no doubt lovely faces. But yeah, if possible, please keep your cameras and mics off. If you do have questions, rather than doing it over the mics, which is harder for us to manage, we would request that you put them in the chat box, which you can find the icon for that on your screen. You can put them in the chat anytime. We'll just monitor them. And then when in the second half of the hour, we'll have time to answer questions, and we'll try and group them and answer them sort of logically and sensibly if you do have any questions. So just chuck them in the chat whenever they occur to you, and we will pick them up in the second half. You can also, if you want, put captioning on to make it easier to follow what people are saying. Go to the CC captions button. I think it's normally at the bottom of the screen, and then you can choose captions from there. So as I mentioned before, we share with the Wolfson a commitment to helping the theatre sector become more environmentally sustainable, so that we can play our role as a sector in helping the UK reach net zero. But also, obviously, there are huge benefits to you as theatres operators and owners to improve the efficiency of your building, to improve the comfort of the building, and importantly, with the cost of living being what it is, reducing costs as well. So there are all sorts of, as I'm sure you know, lots of benefits and reasons why improving the sustainability of your building is a win-win situation. I just want to point you towards the Theatre Green Book. You may or may not be aware of it, but this is a scheme that the Theatres Trust is a lead partner on, and it gives really good guidance on how to make your building, your productions, and your operations within your building as sustainable as possible. We've just launched a second edition, which launched at the beginning of the month. So I would recommend that you have a look at that. You'll also find that there's a building survey tool. It's a very simple Excel tool that you can put in data about your building, and it will generate recommendations around what you should prioritize as your next steps towards greater sustainability. And it divides those next steps into easy wins, things you can do at relatively low cost and effort, things that ideally you would build into your annual maintenance program, and then more significant things that would need capital funding. This scheme will support any of those kinds of projects, anything from easy wins through to capital within the budget of up to £20,000. So do look at that, and we do actually ask a question in the application form about whether or not you've used the Green Book, and if so, how it's informed what you've decided to put in your application. So that's everything from me. I'm going to hand over now to Rebecca Morland, who's our interim theatres advisor and who runs the scheme for the Theatres Trust. And she's going to talk you through some of the key aspects about it in terms of the kinds of things we want to support and some of the criteria that you might want to bear in mind when you're applying. Over to you, Rebecca.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to talk about three areas. I'm going to talk about what the fund supports, who is eligible, and the criteria that we use to assess applications. So firstly, what will the fund support? In summary, we fund projects that improve a theatre building's environmental sustainability and show how a small intervention can produce big reductions in environmental impact. And that can include purchasing key plant and machinery. It can involve replacing inefficient or outdated equipment, or it can include improvements to building, heating, or insulation. We're open to anything which could be described as impactful and high quality, but relates to items. This isn't about operational issues. This isn't about people doing stuff. This is about equipment and about improving buildings. We've got several press releases on our website which have examples of successful projects, and I'm just going to highlight two or three of these. Oxford Playhouse in 2021, they installed what was best described as sympathetic secondary glazing to their 80-year-old sash windows, and that's improved their insulation and it's reduced heat loss. And this was part of a larger capital project. In the same year, the Customs House in South Shields used their funding to update their BEMS system, which has enabled them to reduce gas usage throughout the building, and as a result, at the moment, save significant money in terms of rising gas prices. Installing LED lighting is always popular within the scheme, but we've had applications that have combined this with other improvements. So in 2022, one of the successful applicants was the New Diorama in London. They replaced LEDs in several areas of the building as part of a multi-phase project, but they also improved their storage and workshop facilities to embed material sharing and reuse across design and production. So that was a low cost, but really significant improvement for them. Moving on to eligibility, we've put the criteria in the applications and on the notes, but I'd like to go through them again in more detail. Firstly, we are open to applications from groups that both own or manage their buildings, but if you lease your building, there needs to be more than 5 years left on that lease, and we'll need to see a copy of the lease. And that's because we need to be confident that our investment has longevity. Secondly, you need all the relevant permissions in place for the scheme. If it isn't your building, you'll need written permission from the builder, from the owner, and we will need to see that. If a planning permission is required for your project, then you need to have that in place before you apply. And please do remember that we're a statutory consultee in the planning system, so we should be consulted about any such application. Thirdly, we can only fund a not-for-profit organisation. We're open to applications from any sort of not-for-profit. You can be a charity, you can be a CIC. And we also include theatres that are operated by local authorities, including town and borough councils within this. Fourthly, you need to be able to provide 2 years accounts. You need to have some assurance of financial viability, and your accounts are the best method of this. Moving on to what you actually do as a theatre, that you need to have a year-round programme of live performance. And that we have classified as being no less than 30 performances a year of theatre, dance, comedy, musicals, or any mixture of those. We can't fund venues that are primarily music venues, I'm afraid, and we also can't fund cinemas. And we have had the question in the past, recently, about NT Live, and no, I'm afraid that doesn't qualify as a live performance unless you are in fact the National Theatre, and it's coming on at your theatre. Anyway, and finally, your theatre should be achieving excellence through its producing and programming and/or community engagement and/or architectural significance. Whilst architectural significance is relatively easy to define, we're not prescriptive about how you define excellence in terms of your programming, your producing, or your community work. It's really up to you to demonstrate what that means for you, for your theatre, and for your community. We also need to point out two other things at this point. If you've previously had a grant from the Theatres Trust, whether it's through this scheme or anything else that we provide funding for, you can't apply until 12 months after the date that we have received your final valuation report for that award. If you aren't sure whether you've had a previous grant from us, or whether if you did have a previous grant, whether you provided an evaluation report, please check in with us. We can tell you. It's also worth pointing out that the Wolfson Foundation does fund arts organisations directly. That doesn't stop you applying as long as you're applying for a different scheme. What can't happen is the Wolfson funds you for a renovation project and you apply for us, because that's double funding, and that won't, I'm afraid, work. So those are the eligibility criteria. Let's move on to the criteria for assessment. We assess the application against criteria which basically break down into impact and significance and management and risk, and both are important to us. So looking at impact and significance, you really need to be able to make a compelling case for the environmental impact of whatever you want to do. And as we make it really clear, I think, you need to be able to demonstrate that there are going to be quantifiable benefits in terms of sustainability, and that you have a mechanism in place to evaluate and monitor and report against these. The Green Book, as John has mentioned, is really helpful in that respect. So you do need, if relevant, you need to be able to demonstrate that you are using it. And generally, you need to provide as much detail as possible. This is the core of your application. Secondly, you need to be able to demonstrate that this is a scheme that needs to happen now. This could be because your building is deteriorating. This could be because a piece of key equipment is now significantly out of date, or it could relate to your financial viability and the impact that the lack of sustainability is having on that. But you need to be able to explain to us why this project is crucial for you at this point. And finally, coming back to what I would describe as the role and significance of the venue to its communities and its users, You need to be able to define this yourself, but there needs to be something to evidence it. You could be linking to your website to show the range of work that you do. You could be putting in information about the number of people participating in your community program. I must stress it's not just about numbers. It is about the quality and the range of the work that you do and what that means to the people in your particular community. Moving on to management and risk, you need to be able to demonstrate that the project can be achieved within budget, and that budget needs to therefore be backed up with quotes wherever possible. It's worth pointing out that we're happy to consider applications where our funding will only cover part of the project cost, but you then need to demonstrate what the other sources of funding are likely to be and where you are in terms of achieving these. Have you made funding applications? Are you ready? Have you heard back from funders? Are you in talks, say, with your local authority? You really also need to be able to demonstrate that the project will be well managed financially and operationally by an experienced team. You could demonstrate this by putting in the track record of team members in dealing with similar projects, or if it's the sort of project where you're working with consultants or specialists explaining their relevant experience. You also need to be able to show an understanding of the risks that might be involved and demonstrate that you've got plans to mitigate those risks if there is a problem. We want to be reassured that you've thought through this. Things go wrong even with the simplest projects, and we're supportive of that. But we need to understand what your plans are. And finally, you also need to be able to demonstrate that the project is achievable within the timescale of the fund. We require grants to be spent within a year of when we grant them. So if your project is potentially a bit further away, and maybe other funding needs to be raised, you really need to question whether this is the right moment to apply. But I think there is space within the application to demonstrate that you are ready to go, and will be ready to go once we've made our decisions. So those are the criteria against which we assess your applications. Thank you. I think I'm now handing back to John for a bit more information.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Just a few more comments and then we'll start responding to questions. I see there's already a couple in the chat, which we can pick up on in just a minute. So as Rebecca said, I think it's really important to be sure that you're ready to apply. It is an annual program. So we will be running the scheme again for the next 2 years after this so far. The deadline is midday on the 6th of September this year, and it will be around a similar time next year as well. So yeah, do read the guidance just to make sure you're definitely ready, that you have all the kind of approvals and quotes that you need. And as Rebecca said, we are happy to entirely fund the project. So to be the sole funder, you don't have to have much funding. But if you are asking for our money to be match funding against a bigger project, then yes, we need to understand how far you've got with fundraising for the balance of the money as well. So all of those are important things to be aware of. Let me just very briefly talk through the next steps. So once you've applied, we will acknowledge your application within 2 working days. If you haven't heard back within or by the end of 2 days, then do please phone the office. It's possible your application, if it may have been caught in our spam filter, and we might miss it, and we definitely don't want to miss any applications. So if you haven't heard from us after 2 days, then please phone the office, and the number is in the guidance document and it's on our website as well. So we don't want all your hard work to go missing. Once you've submitted your application and we've acknowledged it, We will wait until the application deadline, and then we will assess all of the applications in order to come to a decision about who to support. If you are successful, or indeed if you're unsuccessful, we will let you know within about 16 weeks of the application deadline. So please make sure you don't start any work on that project before that time, because we can't fund projects that have already started. So we will let you know after 16 weeks. You then have up to a year to claim the grant. So we recognize that you'll need to schedule in when you do the works. So we will hold on to the grant for you for a year, up until a year after the date of the offer letter that we've sent to you. If we don't hear back from you within a year, we would have to reclaim the grant, unless there are really exceptional circumstances why you've not been able to do it, and we still want to support the work. Once you've completed the work, then once you have told us you're ready to do the work, we will then send you the grant in full. And then once you've completed it, we need to get an evaluation report from you. That's really important, because it helps us understand, that your project is completed successfully, but it also helps us make the case for continued support for this scheme, because we can demonstrate the impact that it's having in theatres across the UK. So you have up to 6 months to send the evaluation report in. The sooner the better, as far as we're concerned, please. And as Rebecca pointed out, if you want to apply to future schemes, not just the Wolfson one, but the other schemes that we run, we would need to have got your evaluation form in for this grant, and it would need to be 12 months after that has been submitted. The reason why we have brought in this rule is because we want to kind of spread the joy and not have people coming back in every year, successfully for grants. So, and also to manage the capacity of the scheme as well. So that's the reason for that rule. So the only other thing I wanted to say was we'll send you the webinar link next week, so you can look at this again if that's useful. After you have applied to, after this webinar finishes, we'll send you a very short evaluation questionnaire. I think 2 or 3 questions. It won't take you very long, but it'll be very useful, because we're only just starting to do these webinars. It'll be useful for us to understand what was helpful, what was less helpful, and so when we do future webinars, we can take that into account. I think we'll go over to some questions. Rebecca, shall you and I have a little scroll through and take them off, go through them one by one? So Andrew, I think, sent through a few questions. And Rebecca, you must keep me straight if I get anything wrong. Your first question was about the fact that you have a community cinema that operates for 12 sessions a year, and then you have 35 days of live theatre performance each year. Are we in or out of this? You are absolutely in, because we support community and art centres that put on a mixed programme. It's just as long as there's a minimum of 30 live performances. So the fact that you're doing 35 days of cinema, 12 sessions of cinema per year is fine from our perspective, because you're doing 35 days of live performance. So hopefully that answers that question. Andrew had another question or a comment about the Wolfson appearing only to support professional theatre. I'm not sure about that, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the Wolfson themselves, but it might be useful to give a little bit of background as to why we're in this partnership with the Wolfson. It's because they recognise that we are well placed in terms of our knowledge of the broader theatre sector to kind of manage this small grant scheme. The Wolfson tends to manage larger schemes, but I think it'd be worth double checking with the Wolfson about whether or not they support other kinds. Rebecca, did you want to come in?
I was going to say that with this scheme, we don't is open to everybody.
Absolutely.
But there is a commitment to demonstrating, I suppose, excellence And in my experience, I think some community theatres find it harder to explain why what they're doing is valuable than professional theatres do, partly because it's something you don't often think about. So that's an area that when you write your application, you need to it's not just numbers, it's not the number of people you reach, it's the way you reach them, who those people are, and the quality of the experience that you provide for them. So I think all of those things can make community theatre applications read a lot better, and you need to emphasize those when you in that section of the application.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. It's a really good point. We're not looking for 4-star reviews in The Guardian. That's not how we, that's one way of evaluating excellence. And certainly some of the bigger, more professional theatres probably would provide reviews for their shows or that kind of thing. But how well do you serve your community? How engaged are they with your theatre? Have you got some nice feedback you could share with us, some quotes or even some audience evaluations that you've done? That kind of thing is another way that you can evidence that you are providing an excellent program of work in your theatre that really serves the needs and the interests of the people in your area. So there's lots of ways, we don't want to be prescriptive about it, but there are lots of ways that you can demonstrate excellence. Vicky had a question about the lease at her theatre. So we have a lease for 20 years, but it has a 1-year break clause. In other words, you can terminate the agreement with 1 year's notice. I don't think that does rule you out. I think what would be helpful is to, if possible, to get a note or a letter from your freeholder, from your freeholder, to say that they don't currently intend to operate the break clause. I mean, of course they can change their minds. The fact that it's a 20-year lease is useful. It would be also useful to say how long you've been leasing it previously, because that would also demonstrate, longevity. So I would say trying, if you can, to get some reassurance from your freeholder, but we definitely wouldn't exclude you on that basis. Shall we scroll down and have a look at some others? You said we cannot apply to Wolfson for the same scheme. If it's a capital campaign, does that mean we cannot apply for any other project within that capital campaign? I think the answer to that is yes, you can, because you can identify different bits of it, different bits of the project. And we've done that in the past. We have funded, a particular element within a bigger capital scheme. We like to do a bit of a balance across the grants that we support, projects we support. So we tend not to only support small subsections of bigger projects. We quite like doing, this is the entire project as well. But absolutely, if you are doing a capital scheme and you're, I don't know, you're looking at LED lighting and you're also looking at insulation and you're going to the Wolfson for insulation and us for LED lighting, that would be acceptable.
And I think there's a later question about phasing for a capital project, which is very much the same thing. If you divide, I mean, a lot of people have what you could almost describe as continuous capital projects, ones which can only be completed in phases. And we would be fine about funding one phase and the Wolfson a later phase. And in theory, we'd be fine about funding one phase. Then, and if your project went on for long enough and you fulfilled all the criteria about reporting, then you coming back for a later phase of that project. But as long as we'd had all your evaluations and enough time had passed.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, and I'm picking up a comment from Alan about we're an amateur company which owns our theatre. Are we eligible? Absolutely.
Oh, hell yes, yeah.
Yeah, providing you do 30 public live performances a year, minimum of that, then you are totally eligible. And for me, one of the joys of this scheme is that it is any theatre can apply. Anything from a Grand West End theatre through to a community-run venue or a volunteer-run venue. You're probably not aware of this, but about 25% of all of the UK's theatre venues are run by volunteers. They're a really important part of the whole ecology. So we absolutely will support an amateur company who own and run their own theatre. Statutory consultee question. You reference that you're a statutory consultee and should be consulted in regard to projects requiring planning permission. Could you expand on this? Shall I do that?
Up to you.
Yeah. Well, go
Go
on,
on,
Rick.
you do it.
All right, I'll
Okay,
do it.
no,
I'll
I
do
mean,
it. I'll do
go
it.
on.
Yeah. Within the planning system, there are certain organisations that are called statutory consultees, which means that the local planning authority, the council, to whom you would apply for your planning permission, have to ask those statutory consultees their opinion. So, for instance, Historic England are a statutory consultee when there's a heritage element. There's a whole bunch of other statutory consultees. We're a statutory consultee when it's on a theatre. And so the local authority will share the plans with us and ask us to respond. Now, of course, if you've ever been involved in planning, you'll know that anybody can comment on a planning application. They're in the public domain, and your neighbours can comment. Anybody can comment, but statutory consultees have what you might call a slightly elevated status. The local authority have to consider our opinion. They don't have to agree with us. If they decide not to follow our recommendation, they have to explain why not. But they're absolutely at liberty not to follow our advice. So we would generally say we support the scheme, or we support it with certain changes, or we don't support it because we think it's detrimental to the theatre. And we would encourage you to talk to us before making a planning application, because we can help you and guide you. We're very happy, or in fact, we much prefer to be a kind of critical, supportive friend at the early stage, rather than just a kind of a hoop you have to jump through at the end of the process. So hopefully that answers the question. If you're in doubt about whether or not your application needs planning permission, again, you can ask us, and we can give you some advice about whether or not it's something that would require planning permission or not. I take it that the heart at the bottom of your comment means you're happy with the response, and we've answered it adequately. Thank you. How many grants are you planning to make each year? That's a very good question. No, so with this scheme, we normally, I think it's about 6 or 7, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's not a lot, I have to say, and we would love to make more. The Wolfson have given us a little bit more money for this year, so we'll be able to make a few more, but I don't think we'll be going into double figures. So it is really competitive, I'm afraid to say, with the increase in the number of people applying. This might be a moment also to tell you about another scheme that we run with the Limbury Foundation, Limbury Trust, which offers smaller grants of up to £5,000. They can be for sustainability, or they can be for pretty much anything else. Access and inclusion, or urgent repairs, that kind of thing. So, it might be worth having a look at that as well, and applying to that scheme. The next round for that scheme is in January 2025. Yeah, have a look at the Limbury scheme as well. Can you explain how the applications are assessed? Is more weighting given to any project types, or is it based on fastest payback? Oh, that's a good question. Rebecca, you take that.
Thank you. No, weighting. There isn't different weighting for different project types. We really we would look at fastest payback or best carbon saving, but we'd also, I think, look at value for money, and how the scheme can really, how the impact that the scheme is going to have on the viability of the theatre. Because although it's a scheme about sustainability, we're also interested in the theatre as a whole. So an interesting scheme that you can't demonstrate will make a real difference to you is not going to be as interesting as a scheme that you can absolutely say, look, we know that this is going to cut our electricity costs next year, and we know that our electricity costs are going up.
Yes, and I think one of the things I like about this scheme is that it's for the stuff that's not particularly glamorous, and often stuff that people won't see, but will make a big difference to you as a theatre. So LED lighting is a really popular one. PV, solar panels is quite a popular one. Building management systems is, but but we don't have like a kind of it's got to be one of those three. If you can demonstrate that it has it's going to have a sustainability impact, then we're more likely to support it.
I was going to say we've had some really interesting applications in the past from people who've implemented or are planning a range of measures. So they've gone around their buildings and looked at things like water saving and small things that you could do to make an impact and pull those together in a package. So
Yeah.
we welcome applications like that as well.
And I would go back to the Theatre Green Book as well, because the way that the building survey tool works is that it identifies not only which are easy wins and which are maintenance and which are capital, but also which ones will have the biggest impact in terms of CO2 emission reductions. So it's worth having a look at that as well. And you can use that as evidence. Shall we go on to Andrew says we've won awards. Absolutely. Awards is another good way of demonstrating excellence.
There's been a couple more questions about eligibility. There's been a couple of one youth theatre who do 5 performances but weekly meetings. No, I'm really sorry. Only the performances would count towards your 30 a year. And there's another theatre which wants to put on more theatre events, and I think wants to work out what qualifies as a performance. And I think I'd just say anything that actually has an audience and is on sale publicly. That's normally how I'd define a performance, if that's of any help.
Okay, and just scrolling down. Does the program include the putting in place of solar panels on the roof?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So solar panels are definitely one of the things that the scheme can support. We talked about statutory council too. Just scrolling through to where we're going silent. It's because we're seeing questions and going, oh, actually, we've already answered that one. So that's the reason for us being a little bit slow.
There's a question about repairs to a large props and costumes store and whether that would qualify. I think my comment would be that you'd have to be able to demonstrate how that made your operation more sustainable. And at the moment, it looks as if it's just a building repair. So I think you'd probably have to work out a better argument for that, and maybe look at an application to our small grant scheme instead, which, although the amount is less, you would fit. It would be rather easier to fit those criteria.
So yeah, it definitely has to demonstrate, improvements in the environmental sustainability. It's not the part of the building that matters. We are very happy to support people who are improving their workshops or their rehearsal spaces, as well as their main theatre auditorium or the foyer. So, but in all cases, it needs to be sustainability.
Oh, that's a really interesting question.
Which one are we on now?
Would we consider solutions to help reduce audience members' carbon footprint, e.g., installation of electric bike charging or
I think we would. I think we would. I mean, it's a really important area. Encouraging more sustainable travel by with from your audience is a good way. It's harder to measure, of course, but that's not to say it's not worth doing. So we would consider that.
I think you could also tie it in with supporting your staff to work more sustainably and possibly do things like work market more sustainable marketing if you had team members using electric bikes and so on. So you could certainly make up a really interesting argument. What else have we got?
Yeah. Deadline this year is I did have it just now and I've forgotten it, is the 6th of September, midday on Friday, the 6th of September. Oh, somebody's put it in. Thank you, Theatre Trust colleagues, for doing that.
And could that also include subsidising tickets bought by public transport users as a discount? No, I don't think it could. It's not capital, I'm afraid. I mean, it's a scheme for stuff. rather
Yeah.
than schemes.
I mean, that's a
So
great idea, and
it's a
I would
great
encourage you
idea,
to consider it. Um,
but it's
but
not.
yeah, it doesn't buy stuff, and we're about the kind of the physical improvements that you can make
Yeah.
with this scheme. When does the scheme open? It's open now. It's basically open all the time. So as soon as this round closes, you can send in applications for the following year, but it will be a year. So I would recommend probably just holding off until nearer the time. And we have funding from the Wolfson for a further 3 years, including this year. So it will definitely run next year and the year afterwards, which is great news, and we're very excited about that. And I think that takes us to the ends of the questions, unless we've missed any. What
Oh,
is your reporting requirement, please? Yes, so we need to hear from you at a couple of points after once you've been awarded a grant. We need to get an acceptance letter from you within about a week or two of us submitting the grant, and to complete the acceptance letter, you need to read the terms and conditions. So on the web page for this scheme, you'll see there's an application form. There's a guidance document that covers a lot of the material we've covered today about how to make a good application and what we need to see. And then there's a terms and conditions document, which is a little bit legalistic, I'm afraid, but it's just to make sure that the investment is secure and that it's going to what we said wanted it to go to. So I would recommend reading the T's and C's even before you apply, just so you know what they are and what we'll be asking you to comply with. So we need your acceptance back to say we're happy to accept the grant, we agree with the T's and C's. We need that back in about a week or two after you've been awarded the grant. We then need to hear from you next when you're ready to go. And don't forget, we need you to complete the project within a year of our acceptance letter, our offer letter coming to you. So you would then tell us, we're ready to go. And at that point, you would be claiming the grant and we would pay the grant over to you. We make a back transfer to your bank account. And then we need to hear from you when you finish the project. Again, maximum of 6 months after the project is completed, we will send you an evaluation form, and we'll need that back within 6 months of the project completing. So it's quite light touch. I mean, it's a relatively modest scheme, and we're trying to make it as straightforward and as light touch as possible and not too heavy and bureaucratic. But obviously there are certain things we need to do to make sure that it is still, providing the value for money, and the grant money is going to the right projects and that are being managed correctly. Do you consider, what is the best way to make contact with you on planning related advice?
Look on our website has got our planning advisor's details, and he will field all your comments and questions. That's probably the quickest thing to do, because I could give you it now and I'd probably got his email address wrong or something dreadful.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There's also an advice@theatrestrust.org.uk email address, advice@theatrestrust.org.uk. And we have a team of advisors. So we have Tom, who's our planning advisor, Rebecca's our theatres advisor. We have Claire, who is our architecture advisor, Mark, who's our heritage advisor, and Sian, who's our theatres at risk advisor. So between them, they can provide quite a holistic or a very holistic advice. And so we'll triage any inquiries that come in and send them to whoever's the most appropriate person to get back to you and either set up a Zoom call or a phone call just to talk about your application and what you're planning to do. Oh, thank you for putting the advice at email address in, colleagues. Vicky says, do you consider funding 100% of the project? No, we are very happy to fund 100%, absolutely. So I should have said, yes, we do fund 100% of projects. We fund 100% of projects. If you are looking for more than £20,000, and you need some match funding, we just need to have that sort of some evidence of what you're doing about getting the match funding. Have you already got it? or have you already applied, and who have you applied to, etc., etc. And
We would,
usually something about what you'll do if you don't
yeah,
get the money as well, the match
yeah,
funding, I mean.
yeah. Particularly with smaller theatres, we do realise it's incredibly hard to get funding. So if you've got a project that you can do for 20,000 or under 20,000, then we're entirely happy to fund that.
Yeah. So Max has asked about how many
Yeah.
quotes we need.
We prefer to see several because it demonstrates value for money, but it also means that you've spoken to more than one company. So if your original company quite often come back to you and then go, well, we can't do the work in the time you want to, you've got a backup. And particularly at the moment when prices are rising and changing, I think just going through the exercise of asking 2 or 3 people for quotes, even if they gave you quotes 6 months before, checking that prices haven't gone up,
And I think it's
it
worth,
just eliminates risk, really.
yeah. I mean, there's the odd occasion where the thing that you want is so specialist that maybe only one person can do
There is
it,
that.
but it'd be worth saying that. So if you do only
Yeah.
supply one quote, maybe say why. But ideally 2 or 3 would be good, I think, just to demonstrate value for money. When would funding out?
Would the funding? Yeah. I think if you've worked out the case for it and you can demonstrate that the results are eye-opening, then it wouldn't be ruled out because it's a capital project.
Yes.
So yes,
Yeah. So this is a
electric
question
cab
from me
dryers.
of
Sorry, I didn't.
just explain to everyone else who may not be looking at all the chat
Yeah,
as avidly as
sorry.
you and I are, Rebecca. Yeah. So this is quite a query about whether or not the funding would support moving from paper hand towels to electric hand dryers. If you, as Rebecca says, if you can demonstrate that there is a significant improvement in terms of CO2 emissions from doing that, then absolutely. Accreditation, I'm not sure, Dominique, what you mean by that. Maybe you can drop another comment in and perhaps help us. I'm not quite sure what you mean by accreditation. If you're still here, Dominique.
If what you mean is what sort of proof do we require that your skit that we've got that you've worked your way through the process and you've got appropriate information. I mean, it goes back to things like quotes from potential suppliers. If it's information about your credibility as as people to manage projects, then just a few lines about what you might have done similarly. But if you
Okay, I understand what Dominique's saying now. So thank you,
okay,
Dominique. Yeah, do you require any crediting or logo use? Yes, we do.
sorry.
Again, if you look at the T's and C's, there's information there about that. So absolutely, we do need some accreditation. We don't need you to display a logo in the foyer or anything like that, but it's when you're sending out press releases or putting information on your website about the fact you've got the grant, it's that kind of thing is when we would need some accreditation for the fact that we've given you this grant. Environmental improvement accreditation, no, we don't require that. We would expect you to have researched your scheme and why it's the right one for you to do. Again, I would recommend looking at the Theatre Green Book and using that as evidence. But also, if it's a particularly complex scheme, so for instance, heating and ventilation are complex areas in buildings, you might want to get some expert advice and use that as well as evidence that you have, that you've thought about why this is an important intervention at this time.
And also because, as John said, we've got a team of advisors here. If your scheme is architecturally challenging, we would certainly ensure that other team members reviewed it thoroughly and gave us advice on how it might work.
Great. Do we have any more questions? Or is everyone ready for their lunch? Unless this is your lunch hour, I don't know. Okay, I think it looks like we've reached the end of the questions. I hope that's been helpful. Do please let us know by filling in the evaluation questions that we, oh, in fact, there's a link to it there, but I think we'll probably email it to you as well. But there's a link there for the evaluation. It's only a few questions. It won't take you long, but it'd be hugely helpful for us to understand how useful or not useful this has been, so that when we do it in future, we can improve this webinar experience as well. All that's left to say is, if you do decide to apply, all the very best, and we look forward to seeing your applications. Thank you for joining us.